Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe P Zapia. That is Kyle Yates. And today, it's a Wisdom Wednesday where we're going to kick some knowledge for you, educate the masses, and have a little fun at the same time. And today's topic is about how to approach a first-year Dynasty draft. Because, you know, with a Dynasty draft, a Dynasty league, you're always trying to balance things. You're balancing winning now and looking to the future at the same time. It's a little bit different preparation, obviously, a little deeper preparation as well, and maybe a little bit more, obviously, work that has to go into it in terms of the player pool in most formats. And of course, there's nobody better to talk about this than our good friend and the host of the Dynasty Football Podcast right here on Fantasy Pros, Kyle Yates. What's up, Yates? How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. This is my first Wisdom Wednesday, so I'm excited. This format, I get to just talk for like 10 minutes and then get out of here. Oh, man, this is a great day.
Pretty much. That's what we do. It's going to be real quick. We're going to get in, get out. And the first thing we're going to talk about, I think, when we're, trying to discuss, and again, this is for different startup dynasties too. We'll touch on the Superflex and the difference between how to prepare for those and just your standard PPR kind of leagues with your regular flex positions. But, for me, there's always two things I like to be when I go into a draft, and that is prepared and flexible. I think sometimes people go in with a concept in their head of this is how it's going to go, and then inevitably it never goes that way, Yates. It always goes the other way. And I just was involved in a first-year startup mock draft on a site. They asked me to go do it, and I had the 1-1. I took Christian McCaffrey 1, and I could have taken Mahomes. I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the running back. Let's see what happens. Let's have some fun. Of course, there's a massive quarterback run because it's a Superflex startup, right? And when it makes it back to me, Najee Harris, still available. Well, okay, I'm going to take him. He's the guy. Then DeAndre Hopkins was still there. Those are my next two picks. I didn't come away with a quarterback until the 4th and 5th round, where I doubled up with Tannehill and Stafford, two older QBs. And the point I'm making with the story is this. I was prepared as Mr. Superflex to go in there and make sure I got some good quarterbacks right away. That board didn't evolve that way. Therefore, I had to kind of pivot, as I know you are a big fan of pivot. And there you go. That is what it ends up being. And I think the first thing is understanding you can't always go in there and dictate. Sometimes you have to be flexible and take the best values of the board and then craft your team that way.
Right. And, what I wanted to do here with this topic was come in and say, like, what do I wish that I had known when I did my first startup draft? And, and we talk about it here, and the thing that you're mentioning is don't go into your draft with a set strategy. Like, go into it and let things play out. Like, there's a strategy that we talked about, Ray and I did when he was the co-host of the Dynasty podcast. We talked about the productive struggle approach. That's something that, as you can do in a Dynasty startup, you can go in and you draft youth. You go in there, you draft first and second year players only, and in preparation that you're going to be really good in 2 years. Now, that's a fine strategy. It's something that you can play out. Like, it has its term, it's defined for a reason. But I think that going into it and just seeing what it plays out, what your first couple rounds play out like. We did a mock draft here recently on the YouTube channel where I went in and through 4 rounds, it was like, all right, well, it looks like now I'm chasing a championship because of just how the board fell and the players that I added. So then in the 4th or 5th round, I was more than comfortable adding a Julio Jones. Whereas if I had the first few rounds had played out and I was getting some younger players where I probably wasn't going to be really good year 1, but maybe in year 2, then I probably would have passed on Julio Jones. So just in this, like, let the board play out, let value fall to you. And that's the second one that I want to talk about here. The second tip is take value where it falls. Do not be afraid to, because a great player falls into your lap, to continue a run, right? You talked about that quarterback run. It probably would have been really easy for you in the second round to go, well, I'm panicking. I got to just grab a quarterback. Well, no, like, you can take the value where it falls. Do not be afraid to do that. Do not get these two really tie in to each other pretty well here. Don't get so locked into something where you pass on value where it falls in your Dynasty startup draft.
Yeah, and inevitably, it tends to be what? The veterans. The veterans are the ones that fall because people's like, well, Julio Jones has been in the league for a while, or this guy's on the decline, or look, it's okay to win now in Dynasty. And even in that team I just mentioned, that roster, looking at that roster, I love the running backs. Christian McCaffrey and Najee Harris. Oh my goodness, DeAndre Hopkins, what a phenomenal core. Build a core roster strength. 2 potential top 5 running backs in the next 2 years on that team. and then address and understand, okay, my quarterbacks are a little older, so next year in the rookie draft, I have to be the team that's looking to draft a quarterback and looking to get younger at those positions. And I think that's what you have to do. And I love when you're talking about value where it falls, because to me, that is something in the startup dynasty first year leagues that inevitably those veteran guys just end up kicking around maybe a round or two or maybe even three longer. Why do you think that is? What is it? Is it the fascination of what the guy could be, these young players, and always what they could be and the potential, as opposed to the guys who've been doing it for 4 or 5 years in the league already? And where do you value the respect versus the upside, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think the reasoning for it is that people don't play with the mindset of 2 to 3 years, right? Mm-hmm. They think that I'm going into a dynasty league, I'm going to have these players on my roster for the next 10 years. And one, the likelihood that your league is still going to be going in 10 years is very, 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 very small. So playing in 2 to 3 years, so much changes year after year in Dynasty, which is why I love it, because the format, so the players that you're betting on, the players that you get ahead of, they could drastically see their situation improve, or they could drastically see the player that you thought was a stalwart on your Dynasty roster is no longer because he had a rookie drafted to the team above him or something like that. So I think people overvalue youth, and that's something that I really want to caution, because I did that. My first Dynasty rookie draft, I went in and was like, I need to draft players that are 25 and younger. I don't think that I had a player that was older than 25 on that first Dynasty roster. And, I think that being willing to recognize that 2 to 3 year windows is really where you need to be playing.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. The 2 to 3 year window is what you want to do. Plus, the one thing that always recycles every single year into the league is new upside talent. That's the one thing every year you get. You know what you don't get every single year? Christian McCaffreys. You know what you don't get every single year? Guys who are stars in the NFL. And I think it matters to take guys that are stars in the NFL and say, all right, this is my core, and building a core roster strength is something that I'm very big on, Yates. It's something that I always push with, and I think it's very difficult to do with all young players that are still figuring things out. Sometimes it takes a running back a year, 2 years to really kind of come into their own into the league. And I know nowadays we're getting spoiled, and I guess here's the question I can ask you about this whole youth and whether or not people should value it or overvalue it. With a wide receiver class coming in last year being so good, with so much talent in this year's class, are we getting spoiled? Is this the trend? How do you kind of disseminate between these two things? Because it feels like the temptation is growing every year to get in on those rookie guys, because those are guys making an impact, but the wrong rookie guys can set you back in Dynasty a few years.
Right. If I can't tell you for certain what the 2022, 2023 class is going to be like. If I could, I wouldn't be doing this job. I'd be doing betting, and I would be making a ton of money. But I do think that we need to be cautious about how good these previous classes have been, 2019, 2020, because of there have been standout players. Obviously, we can talk about Justin Jefferson and what he did last year, but then for every Justin Jefferson, there's a Henry Ruggs and a Jalen Reagor who didn't hit in their first year, right? So it's impossible to predict who those players are going to be that come out swinging. So I do think that being able to lean into the proven players, it has a definite higher percentage of paying off for you, rather than taking those dart throws, which can definitely hit, but they have a lower percentage of paying off.
Now, one of the more popular formats for Dynasty has become Superflex, and rightfully so, because Superflex is awesome. So in that, I do think it is good, and I kind of agree with your philosophy here on our fourth tip, which is trying to come away in this first 4 to 5 rounds with 2 quarterbacks, because and chances are it's a 12-person league, and in that case, you know how deep that pool is going to be in the Superflex, and you probably want to get a third quarterback if you can swing it, if you want to do that, and I think that is a good practice. You don't want to press it, but at the same time, you want to come away with 2 viable starting quarterbacks, because otherwise you're falling potentially behind, because the elite quarterbacks are separating themselves even from QB1 in the last few years.
Yeah, and we came out right at the top and we said don't go into your draft with a set strategy. And so I don't want to say this and have it be like a set strategy.
I don't think it's a strategy so much as a good practice.
Right. And the reason why I mention it is because I do know that there are a lot of people who are coming from one quarterback formats, or who have never done a Dynasty startup draft at all, and their first one is a Superflex. And they just have no idea how to value the quarterback position and how it differs from one QB formats to Superflex. So what I say is I am attempting to walk out of the first 4 rounds in my Superflex draft with 2 quarterbacks. and then I'll wait until the 7th, 8th, 9th round in that range to grab my QB3. So because of the value of quarterbacks in a Superflex league, I do want to make sure that I've got 2 locked in solid starting options. I do want to load up on running back in that time frame too, because the running back pool dries up really quickly once you get past the 5th round. And you can find this all out for yourself. Go over to FantasyPros.com and the draft simulator. Like, check that out. Do a Dynasty startup mock draft, because you're going to find out that if you wait on quarterback, those quarterback runs happen pretty quickly, and you're suddenly looking at like Daniel Jones as your QB1 or something like that, and you're going to be like, oh, I need to hit restart this draft. So yeah, make sure that, or not make sure, but have that in your mind to go into your Superflex draft and try to walk out with the 2 quarterbacks in the first 4 rounds.
Yeah, and we're not, like I said, not trying to be super specific. Oh, you gotta get a guy in the first round. You got to be the person who takes a quarterback in the top 5 picks. No, but you can if you want to, and it's just that matter of by the time you leave certain rounds, it's good in Superflex to have certain things kind of covered, because as Yates is telling you, the bottom does drop off, and the one thing also that ends up getting kind of pushed is wide receiver talent. And if it's a full point PPR, that's a spot where the supply and demand match up differently than quarterback, than running back, and you can make up ground later with some really good slot wide receivers, the big Deontay Johnson guys of the world, the big volume guys like DJ Moore. You can actually find those guys as the draft goes on into the 4th, 5th, 6th round a little bit more, because the quarterback going early suppresses that value. So there's a little bit of room for error there at wide receiver. And last but not least, something you should always know, and it sounds like something that's, oh yeah, of course we should know your league. But you do. You have to know your league. If you don't know the people you're playing with, that's one thing. If you do know the people that you're playing against, well, that's something you should understand and kind of factor in a little bit to your strategy in terms of their tendencies, but also understanding the scoring, the little loopholes, the little nuances. Do you get points for returning kicks? Do you get different kind of points in terms of, forget, is it half or full point PPR, but even do you get bonuses for 300-yard games? There's all sorts of wrinkles now, and there's so many different scoring systems that you can play around with and manipulate. It is so integral, I think, to understand and make sure that you plan for those little wrinkles in each one of those independent leagues.
Yeah, and knowing the settings is so crucial. And I won't say their name. I'm not going to call them out completely. But in a rookie draft that I was just in, someone drafted Kyle Pitts at the 103 and was like, awesome, man, I get Pitts at the 103 in a tight end premium. And everyone else in the league was like, bro, this isn't a tight end premium league. So, knowing those settings and just making sure, log it, double check it before you hit that draft button. But also, like you said, being able to know your league. And this extends, I wanted to include this because this extends past the startup draft. If you've got a guy who is a homer, Philadelphia Eagles fan, just picking a team out of by random, if you've got that and you know that they're going to be hunting for a Miles Sanders and they're going to overvalue him, or they want Devontae Smith, then you know that as that turn comes around, that they're probably going to be looking at that player, and you can kind of pre-plan out what the next few picks are going to look like. Or after the draft, you can draft Miles Sanders and then go to that owner and say, hey, you want Miles Sanders? And you get a little bit more value in there. So also past the draft, then knowing what the tendencies are for owners. Do they overvalue youth? Do they not listen to this podcast? Do they overvalue youth, and you want to sell off some younger players that you drafted once they hit the first couple weeks of the season, and then you turn them into a big haul, something like that. Knowing your league is really, really important and really, really crucial.
And as Yates said, make sure you go to FantasyPros.com to the draft wizard. And of course, you can start manipulating those, doing some mock drafts, getting prepared, because Dynasty is a really fun format. It's growing every single year. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the Fantasy Football Dynasty podcast that Yates hosts here on. It is a fantastic show here at Fantasy Pros. He's done a phenomenal job with it. I've listened to the show many times, and it's always fun to talk Dynasty. And not only that, Tags, Yates, and myself are going to be doing a startup mock draft in June, so keep lookout for that. It's going to be a Superflex Startup Dynasty mock, so that'll help you prepare for your drafts coming up this summer. And boy, oh boy, we're getting closer to football, which is starting to be good. We turn the page to June. It's a good feeling. All right around the corner, training camp, and a lot more. And then next thing you know, it's preseason. Next thing you know, it's here. But make sure you subscribe to all of our great content in the meantime over at Fantasy Pros. That'll do it for us. For Kyle Yates, I'm Joe Pisapia. We'll see you next time, kids.